Can I turn this on?
Yeah. Just hit that switch behind it.
This one?
Yeah, just either one. Yeah, hit that one, the first one. See if that'll stop. Yeah, there you go.
All right, so let's start with your name and something that makes you unique.
There is nothing that's going to make me. Oh, is it already? Oh my God. My name is David Wayne Parker, and I am. I've been in Mooresville, North Carolina. I was born in North Carolina in 1951 to Mr. and Mrs. David Jones Parker.
And how was it growing up in Mooresville?
It was a little different growing up in Mooresville. I spent my childhood, there was no kindergarten at that time, and so my days were really spent with over at my grandmother's house, Mattybelle Clark Parker, and my grandfather Jacob Parker, and he was a minister. So we hung out at my grandmother's house for the most part as children. And then as we got a little bit older, my dad would sometimes take me to work with him. So I didn't get to watch a whole lot of Looney Tunes. I just had to go to work with him and just hang out on Parkertown Road like most kids.
And describe Parkertown Road as, you were growing up.
Parkertown Road, when we were growing up here, it was at that time it was a dirt road. There was no hard surface road. And my understanding is that the people in the neighborhood had to get together and they had to pay some money down to get the road paved, because even before then it was just a dusty road until it was paved later on in years. And Parkertown Road was fun. We played a lot, and of course my grandfather was the pastor of the Shepherd's Church of God up in Mooresville, up here, and we went to church like most kids did when their parents went, and it was a lot. They taught us a lot about, the Lord and how you have to treat everybody right, even in the world, although the world was not treating us the way we wanted to be treated or we thought we should be treated when we were living here, or when I was living here years ago.
And what did your grandparents do for money?
My grandfather, he was a farmer. Well, I think when I was a kid, when his kids were growing up with my dad. But then he got a job working at a Brady Printing Company in Statesville. And my grandmother was a housewife. But my dad and my mom, they took care of us because my mom was a maid, cleaned up houses like a lot of black women did back in those days. And she later on, after she would clean up those houses, and she got a job as a seamstress at in Mooresville at I think Draymore. And my father, even before he started laying brick, he was working when he came home from the armed services, from the Navy. Let me make sure I clear that up. He was a Navy man, and he was a World War II veteran, and he went into the Navy in 1944, came out in 46, and as a matter of fact, he just passed away in May of this year. He was 106 years old, and my mom was 90 when she passed away in November. So my dad was really, really proud of being a veteran in this country, although I would say his country was not that kind to him when he returned, because he told us about the stories when he came home from the war, that he had his clothes on his back in the duffel bag with his Navy uniform on. But every time a white person got on the bus to come home, he had to get up and hold his things and wait for another person to get off so he could sit down. So to that, he was a little, yeah, that didn't sit too well with him about how that happened during those times. But he said, that's just the way it was during those days.
Do you remember any of that?
Do I remember any of that? Yes. Seeing as how my sister and I spent a lot of time with my grandmother at my grandmother's home. She went to the doctor quite often. She was up in age. And Grandma Mattie, there was a doctor in Mooresville, North Carolina that I'll always remember. His name was Dr. Skeen. Dr. Skeen seemed to be a very popular doctor at that time. And Dr. Skeen's office was right downtown Mooresville. And when we went to Dr. Skeen's office, the office was separated by an aquarium. White people sat on one side and black people sat on the little room that was about half that size. And my biggest question as a kid was, okay, now it's a lot of black people in this room. Why can't we go sit over there? Because you could see through the aquarium the people and the space on that was available on the other side. However, I asked my uncles, why can't we go over there? Shh, you don't say that. You be quiet, baby. You don't want to get in trouble. But I just thought it was just so sad that as we looked through that glass and there were spaces for black people to sit, could have sat, because when there were so many black, especially elder people during that time, if an older lady came in the room or an older man that came in the room, you got up out of your seat and you gave that person your seat, and your grandmother would pull us to the side, and we stood up in the corner and waited for her to see us. And the other thing, of course, nobody, when they came to call on my grandmother, who was much older than most of them, even the doctors and the nurse, they would always come to the door and say, Mattie, the Dr. Skeen will see you now. Never Mrs. Parker, none of that. It was just the way it was. And I thought, golly, they could at least call my grandma Miss Parker or something, but that's just the way it was.
When did you start to see some change in this area?
I started to see some change. Wow. Things began to change after Dr. King was assassinated, I would say. As a student, I went to Unity High School in Statesville, North Carolina. Understand this now. We lived right here in Shepherd's. Shepherd School was right 1 mile from the house. But we had to get on a bus and go from here, from this house, over to Amity School in Cleveland, North Carolina, transfer to another bus, and go to Statesville to Unity High School. That's where the high school kids went at that time. It was black segregated school. The white high schools were on this side. And I recall doing the Black Awareness Movement. I remember when they had what was called the Freedom of Choice Plan during that time. After integration came, there was what was called the Freedom of Choice Plan. It allowed students, if they did not make the adjustment well when they integrated the schools, they could go back to the black schools if they chose to do so, if they had medical reasons or whatever. And I had been in the band, I guess, since about the 7th grade. We were one of the drum majors, but when I went to the high school, I couldn't go out for a drum major. And that time I learned to play the snare drums. My parents bought me a snare drum, and I went to Charlotte, got the snare drum, purchased it at the pawn shop one Friday, I recall, and I was so excited I had a snare drum. But when marching season came, they took the snare drums from me and another man, my buddy Leonard Marshall, who was playing snare drums at that time, and they took them and they purchased brand new drums for the marching band at South Idea High School, and they put us on the bass drums, so we could no longer play the snare drums, so we had to play the bass drums. I recall at lunchtime, you had to stand and hold your plate sometime because the white kids would say, "This seat is saved." And I just thought, this was just horrible. How could they do that to me? I had been to what was the North Carolina Drama Festival already at Unity High School, and the Drama Festival was at Livingston College, and we would go from Livingston College to another school called John Legan High School in Raleigh, North Carolina, and compete there with other students in drama school from the 2A, 3A division. However, when I went to South Florida High School, I was told that no, you will not be able to participate in the drama department, perform in the drama department until you're a senior. They left that to the seniors. And however, I went back to Unity, and I went to got back involved in the drama department in the band. And as a matter of fact, that's how I ended up at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts in Winston-Salem. I also recall during that era, right before I graduated, after Dr. King was assassinated, there was what was called, after I had returned to Unity High School, there was what was called a Mountaintop to the Valley March. And the buses came from, I guess up in the mountains, Tennessee, and they came down through, past a lot of the schools, and there was a march that we all joined. And at Unity High School, and there were rider trucks, yellow rider trucks. We all got behind them singing, "We shall overcome, I'm so glad Jesus lifted me." A lot of the freedom songs, "Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around." And we walked all the way past down to, I think some of them went to Salisbury. But during that time, I was about 16 years old, and they used to let students drive the bus. And I was a bus driver. So I had to come back home. I was coming back to get back to the school so we could pick up the other kids to take them home. However, when we returned to Unity High School's campus, thinking that we were going to drive the bus, all the kids were expelled from school, and our parents had to take us back the next day. Of course, my father wasn't too happy that he had to take off work to for me to get back in school, and so my parents had a nice talk with me, and my father decided, "Well, son, if you don't think you can go to school and stay in school, and I have to watch you, you might want to come work with me." So I decided at that point that it'd probably be best for me to stay in school the next time. So I don't even rent yellow buses, yellow trucks when I move. So that was a good thing about that. But the movement marched on, and we even in the bands, we would have cadences, those 6/8 time cadences, saying, "Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud." And so, it was, I think it was a good move. It was a good thing. That was when I started seeing a bit of a change here, especially around here, and I guess that throughout the country.
All right, let's take a break for a second. So when you graduated from high school, what did you do?
When I graduated from high school, I went on to the University of North Carolina School of the Arts in Winston-Salem, and I majored in speech and drama. I had and I owe a lot of that to a lady by the name of Miss Louise Bradshaw, who was my English teacher there, and also was was one of my heroes was a man named Mason C. Miller. He was the principal. He was from Mooresville, North Carolina, and he was the wife of Miss Geneva Miller, and her sister was Selma Burke. So they always tried to instill in us a sense of pride and that we should try to put our best foot forward. And I remember that on the school in Edmonton when we left, he said there was a motto that I took and put in my pocket. He said, "I will study and get ready, and someday my chance will come." And it did not matter. Mrs. Miller was, even though she was at Unity and Mr. Miller was at Amity, they made sure that we were exposed to the best of the best. And that's how I ended up going to the School of the Arts. And after I graduated from the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, I went to New York, and I was in a production company called Afro Productions out of the St. Mark's Theater Church in New York, and we went on tour up and down the East Coast, out in the Midwest for a while. And then I decided that I wanted to star in a 9-to-5. And I had a couple of jobs working for the Agency for Child Development in New York. And I was an exploring executive, but I retired in 2015 as an account executive with the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority in Washington, D.C. And now I reside in Bowie, Maryland.
And during your career, did you come back and forth to Mooresville?
Yes, because my parents were still living here, I did come back probably, well, before they became really ill, I guess after I retired in 2015, I would often come backwards and forward to Mooresville to see them and make sure that they were okay. And then there were times when I would come and take them to Maryland, and I'll drive them to Decatur, Georgia, outside of Atlanta where my sister lived. And so I spent a lot of time with them because they took time out for me and my sister. And that really, really just meant so much, because as kids, every year, my father, who laid 1,000 brick a day, when he would lay brick, even up until his 80s, he found the time to take our family to New York around the 4th of July, or sometime to my uncle's in the winter to Tampa, Florida, to visit them. And I remember those days of going to Coney Island in New York, where the amusement park was, and just to see the Statue of Liberty. He just wanted to try to expose us as much as he could to what this world had to offer, because he had been in the armed services, and he just wanted us to see that life was a whole lot better than the way it looked on Parkertown Road.
Do you think you would have been able to accomplish the things you accomplished if you stayed here?
No.
Why is that?
Because of a lack of opportunity for blacks at that time, and the fact that I was able to get a scholarship to go to school, even if I had stayed at South Iredell High School, I don't think they would have pushed me to go to the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, which was a white institution. It was just like I was just a black kid there. But by going to Unity, those teachers just inspired me so much, to better myself. That my dad, who always said, "Son, wherever you go, you take yourself. You don't take nobody else." So, I think that even staying here, and when of course at one point when I stayed here, he said, "No, you you go ahead and you'll see it's a good world out there, and it's a lot for you to see, and you'll be fine. And this day he's gone, and I really thank him for instilling that in me and showing me and my sister that there can be a better life for you if you would just get out and aspire to do some of the things in this life.
And tell us a story about your father.
My daddy was in the armed forces. I mean, not in the army. He was in the military first. Let me clear that. He was in the military. He was in the Navy. He was a Navy man. He was proud to be a Navy man. And he was on the CV-17 Bunker Hill aircraft carrier. And to the left there's we have a shadow box of that was presented to him at their 50th wedding anniversary. Daddy was the third child of 10 in his family, and my grandmother said that he could pick 300 pounds of cotton a day. And he would say sometimes, at the end of the day, he got $3, a penny a pound. But see, sometimes he said you didn't get $3 because if your parents were sharecroppers, some of that money was already, would go to the sharecropper owner, who the sharecropper was. But after he left Burlington Mills, his brother was laying brick, and he learned to lay brick. So he went in business for himself, and as a matter of fact, he built this house that we lived in for. He lived in for over. Well, it was built in 1952, so over 70 years this house has been here, and he made it, maybe added on to it, but he provided a nice place for us to stay, and I'm just so grateful for he and my mom for what they did to try to make life better for us and my sister. At one point, he moved us. He thought, well, maybe we should move to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And we were up there for about 6 months. He was looking for a job, but the job didn't come through. So when it was it came through a week after he left, he had come back home, and he had started working here again. But Daddy worked until he was in his 80s. We had to stop him from working. So it was like I would say he was probably about 84 or something. We didn't even know he wasn't supposed to be driving until he was probably 92 years old, because we went to the doctor with him, and the doctor said, "Mr. Parker, didn't I tell you that you probably shouldn't be driving?" He said, "No," but because he had gotten a little dementia, he said he didn't know nothing about nobody telling him he shouldn't drive. So that was one of the funny things about him. But he had a great sense of humor, no matter what. I remember when we took his license, he said that he was in Mooresville, and my sister had gone to Belks, and when she came back, he was outside of the car trying to put a note on the car that he was walking over to the Waffle House to go get him something to eat in the heat. We was like, "Daddy, you can't do that." And then, of course, his words were, "Why come I can't? If I can do what I want to do." So, but it was a nice guy. He was just a joy to have as a father. I'm so grateful. That was my hero, and I loved him. He and my mother, and I love my mom. She was a real church lady, and she always tried to be nice. They taught us, do unto others as you had them do unto you. Of course, later on in life, you find out that don't always work out, but they did try to instill that in us. And so just having them as our parents was just a blessing. So.
And tell us a story about your grandparents.
Grandpa Jacob was he liked to travel too. He was a minister. He was a pastor of Shepherd's Church of God. Now that was my grandfather's on my dad's side, and my grandmama, as I said earlier, she was a housewife, and he was from Stony Point, North Carolina, and his grandmother lived to be 113 years old. She was a slave, and interesting enough, although she was a slave, me being a child at that time, children should be seen and not heard. The only interactions we had with that grandmother was you went in and you said, "Hi, Grandma Harriet," when after she had spoken to you, "Hi, Grandma Harriet," and you went and you sit down. There was no conversation with her at all. Not my grandfather was the one who usually talked to her, but not my dad. Certainly not the kids. But my mom's dad, he was a he was a he was worked at the flour mill in Statesville, and his wife was also a housewife. You know, but the other interesting thing I wanted to include is that when we were children here growing up, they taught us in the schools, which is a little different than it is now. There was no such thing as biracial. If you had 1% black blood in you, you were black. That was the big difference. Now, there was no dancing around the color or whatever. You know, if you had 1% black blood in you, you was considered a black person. As a matter of fact, my birth certificate does not say black. It does not say I'm African American. It says a colored child. And that's from back in the 50s, and a lot of kids were, that was where we were born at Lawrence Hospital in Mooresville. And as a matter of fact, my sister, when she was born, I understand she almost died because the umbilical cord came loose, and my aunt happened to be down there, and she had to rush and get a nurse, and that was the only thing that saved her life. As a matter of fact, my sister, although she had rheumatic fever, she outgrew it, and she was the first black female announcer for Sunday services at WHIP in Mooresville, and her name is Peggy Parker. So after she became a radio announcer in Mooresville, that meant I had to do something.
Stop for a second.
Oh, there is a story about when I was a child.
Go ahead.
Excuse me. There's one thing that stands out in my life and as a child here on Parker Road that didn't touch bases on, and that was, as I said earlier, when you became 16 years old, you could drive the school bus, and the older guys on Parkertown Road drove the school buses. For the most part, it was money. When later on, when I got to ride the school buses, they got $30 a month, so it's like $1 a day for driving the kids to school. And I even drove as I got older. I was a school bus driver, and we made $33 a month, and that was pretty good. And then we got a raise later on, after I had started driving, to $90. I drove the bus from here on Parkertown Road down to the gas plant down by Lake Norman, back over to Amity Elementary School, and then I got on another bus and went to high school at Unity High School, and when that was over, I drove the bus back. My route was 33 miles a day. So I had to leave here and pick up kids at like 7 o'clock in the morning, so I would get to the school and make sure that we stopped at the train tracks and that no train was coming and all of that. And of course, when kids became got in a little trouble on the buses, you had to take them back to school and talk to Mr. Miller. But for the most part, everybody acted. We, they were very disciplined because you did not want to be late to do your chores when you got home. At any rate, there was an incident with the bus when I was probably in about the 5th grade. It had snowed that day, and they didn't close the schools early enough. So the elementary kids had to wait for the high school kids to come from Statesville, North Carolina on the bus to go to Cleveland to Amity School. Well, by the time we got on the bus got down there, and we got on the bus to come home from Amity to Parkertown Road, which was a roundabout way also. The snow had gotten deep, had gotten pretty, it had snowed quite a lot. And when we were coming down the hill on Parkertown Road, the bus started sliding. There was a bridge at the end of down at the bottom of the hill. The bus slid, and the bus turned over, and we all turned over on the bus with about 15 kids. And there were some horses and a pastor, because the fence was torn down, and the older kids helped the younger kids get out the bus, and we started to walk home. It was freezing cold, and we was carrying our books. We saw a man named Mr. Cook. I'll never forget him, in an old black Chevrolet. So he must have called the hospital and told them that the bus had turned over. Well, we walked from down at the bottom of the hill where a bridge was, and by the time we got almost home, they sent one ambulance to come and pick up for 17 kids on a bus. But we were home. We weren't hurt that bad. I think only one person had to go to the hospital. But can you believe that they sent one ambulance to come and collect some children that had been in an accident on the bus? And that was probably in the in the mid-50s. It was not, that was just a bit much. And of course, the other thing was that I recall back in that day, although my aunt and uncle worked down there at the intersection of 115 and Highway 21, Mr. Vickers' store. It was where he had a restaurant down there, and they worked there, but we couldn't go to the front. We had to go around to the back of that restaurant to get a hamburger or a hot dog if we wanted to get one where my aunt and uncle worked. Also, those memories were not good, but we made it. We made it. Because we could have my aunt and uncle's hamburgers anytime we wanted. All the way.
Do you remember any black businesses?
In Mooresville, I remember the Pikes, but of course in Statesville, that was where everything was. You would say that I thought the Hill was where the black people were, because they had Stainless Steel's restaurant, the best hamburgers and hot dogs, and Mr. Littlejohn's barber shop. There was a man by the name of Dr. Absher, who was a dentist there on top of Littlejohn's barber shop. I forget the other black stores that were on the hill there, but it was a hangout, and of course the Elks Club was up there. So, I mean, our county, Statesville we knew where we needed to go and where we could go for the most part and where we really weren't allowed. So, Saturday night, if you got to ride there with your parents, that was a good thing.
And is there any memory that you just want to share?
Any memories that I would want to share? Wow. I'm just glad that I was born when I was born. I'm glad that my parents tried to teach us to follow the golden rules, and I'm so thankful for people like Mr. Miller and Miss Bradshaw and Mr. Campbell, and of course Mrs. Miller, and the fact that Miss Selma Burke, the contribution that she gave through her artwork, it just instilled in me a sense of hope. You know, because if you don't have any hope, you have nowhere to go. You have to have hope and to dream and dream big. You never know what day or who you'll sit down with. And one of the things that I will always remember was when I lived in Atlanta and I was a member of Ebenezer Baptist Church, Mrs. Coretta Scott King, who was Dr. King's wife, was in her children were in my birth month club, and so we would go to dinner together sometime. And one of the things that she was so proud of, I was able to share with her that about the time when we got expelled from school for participating in the Mountaintop to the Valley March. And she said to me, Mr. Parker, I'm just so grateful for the contributions that you young people have made to the movement. And so just for her to say thank you to me for all of those kids that will never be thanked, it meant the world to me. So, and so as I will always cherish the good times on Parker Road, and I'll cherish some of the bad times because they made me stronger. And I always remember some of the things my daddy taught me, and my mom taught us, to try to be fair by people, and don't let the bright lights fool you. Wherever you go, you take yourself. And every road's got to end somewhere. And stay in your lane. Those were some of the things that my father gave me to put in my pocket. And I've used them ever since.
You had mentioned being in the choir.
At Ebenezer. Yes, I was in the choir at, my sister, Peggy, and I, we were in the choir at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. And as a matter of fact, sadly enough, this past weekend, my sister and I attended the funeral services for Mrs. Willie Christine Farris King, who was Dr. King's sister. She was over the music ministry at Ebenezer Baptist Church. And because we were in the M.L. King choir there, I would ride with Mrs. King Miss Farris over to the TV tapings. She also talked to me just about the movement and how life has changed and how she had been through so many difficult periods in her life by losing her brother, Dr. King, and of course A.D., the brother who passed away and who got drowned in the swimming pool, and of course Mama King, as we call her, who was shot while playing the Lord's Prayer at the organ at Ebenezer Baptist Church one Sunday morning. And a deacon was also assassinated during that period. So just being able to speak with them and for them to say how much they appreciated just the little contributions that people who had graduated from these HBC colleges and these black schools meant so much to them. And so that was one of the reasons why I attended her funeral this past weekend. Um, in the After I left home to go to off to college, and I went to Statesville, North Carolina, to King's Department Store, and I was buying linen for my bed in the dorm room. I went over to Housewares in King's Department Store in Statesville, and I could feel somebody watching me. And next thing I know, the manager, they had gone and gotten the manager, and they had accused me of stealing linen. And it was wanted to know, well, why was you gonna steal that for your? I said, I go to college. I'm enrolled at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. They made me show my ID from college. I thought that was the worst thing that could happen to me, even though I was trying to better myself and get an education. And I had money because I was on work study also at college, at school. And for them to accuse me of trying to steal linen, I told them, you can keep this. I don't ever want to come back in this store, and I never did again. After that summer, when I worked, while I was working during the summer for the Arts Center in Winston-Salem, this was my mid-year at the School of the Arts. My dad was bricking this house. Of course, my father he was one of the main masons who did the work on the First Baptist Church in Statesville. And we stopped at a car dealership, and I found a Harold Triumph that I wanted. It was a little white car with wood grain on the sides, and it had wood grain dashboard. It was wonderful with red seats. And the man said that he would sell me the car. He said, I know your daddy. I tell you what, son, I know you going to school, and this would be a nice little car for you. And he charged us $350 for that car. When I got in the car and I headed home, I went right down, just like my daddy said, go down through town and get on 21, you go straight home. When I crossed the outside of Statesville, and here in Iredell County, the police followed me all the way to my house. He followed me. I was so nervous. I was so scared. I did not know what to do. And he followed me all the way down to the end of Parkertown Road. I turned in the driveway. He kept going, and he turned around. I was shaking like a leaf on a tree. And my mom and my dad wanted to know what's wrong. I said, the police followed me. She said, well, that's a nice little car, and they probably don't want a little black kid to have that. So, but I kept it. They let me keep the car, but I never forget that. So when I come home, I always try to make sure, even after I got a nice car, that you drive slow, because I didn't want to get a speeding ticket. Thank you. Isn't that awful?